It's Wednesday, November 5th here in Seoul. I'm Hwang Ji-hye filling in for Laah Hyun-kyung. Thanks for tuning in. And these are the stories we're following at this hour. The Japanese yen's slide on the country's monetary easing is hitting Korean automakers, but at the same time is creating an opportunity for local tourism companies. Results are pouring in the 2014 U.S. midterm elections, and it looks like Barack Obama will be facing a Republican-controlled Senate during his final 2 years in office. America's top diplomat John Kerry once again emphasizes that Washington will closely cooperate with Beijing to denuclearize North Korea. We begin with the weakening Japanese yen that's taking a toll on Korean exporters and especially automakers who are competing against their Japanese rivals in the global market. Our Park Ji-won starts us off.
The Bank of Japan's announcement of expanded monetary stimulus measures last Friday, worth trillions of yen, sent the stock prices of Korea's largest automakers, Hyundai and Kia Motors, slipping by more than 5% on Monday. Additional drops were recorded Tuesday, stripping Hyundai of its staunch second-place position in terms of market capitalization in Korea. Analysts say the fall is largely due to negative expectations that the Korean auto giant will not be able to keep up profitability and stay competitive against its Japanese counterparts.
Taking advantage of enhanced profits due to the weakening yen, Honda and Toyota have been focusing on technological improvements to their vehicles, like boosting fuel efficiency. Korea should keep in mind that the weakening yen will make them more competitive in terms of price and quality of products.
The effects of the weakening yen is not only hitting Korea's big conglomerates, but also sending strong shockwaves to smaller companies. 3 years ago, the yen was trading at more than 1,500 won per 100 yen, but now stands at around 950 won per 100 yen, meaning a 40% decrease in export revenues. According to the Korea Federation of SMEs, the break-even point for small and medium-sized exporter is 1,014 won per 100 yen. The current 1 yen exchange rate falls way below that.
If the exchange rate falls to around 951 per 100 yen, Korea's export volume will decrease 4.2% and down to 8.8% if the rate falls to 900.
Around half of Korea's top 100 exports fiercely compete with Japanese products, but as the yen weakened with no immediate end in sight, bleak forecasts are weighing heavy on Korea's main exporters. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
And for that same reason, the yen's dive, bilateral trade volume between Korea and Japan has been shrinking for nearly 3 years now. But as our Hong Ji-san reports, exchange rates haven't been the only reason behind the lagging trade.
The weak Japanese yen is taking a toll on bilateral trade between Korea and Japan. According to the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, exports and imports to and from Japan have been on a steady decline since 2012, as with the third quarter of this year. It marks the first time that bilateral trade between Seoul and Tokyo has posted negative growth for 3 consecutive years. For Tokyo, the weak yen reduces the need to import Korean-made goods, which have in turn lost their price competitiveness. Added to that is the low domestic sentiment here in Seoul that has led companies to reduce their facilities investment, with imports of machinery and industrial electronics products from Japan dropping more than 20% this year. Tokyo's increased foreign direct investment in Seoul also plays a role in the reduction of imports. Japanese companies account for 28% of all foreign companies in Korea, the highest portion for any country. Besides the weak yen, bilateral tensions between Seoul and Tokyo over historical and territorial issues are also hindering trade. Japan is Korea's third largest trade partner after China and the United States, at a trade volume of $95 billion last year. 송지선, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, the won to yen exchange rate may be causing headaches for the nation's exporters, but there's one industry that's enjoying the opposite experience. Hana Tour, one of the country's biggest traveling agencies, saw its number of Korean tourists to Japan jump over 120% in October from a year earlier. Interpark, another travel agency, saw its customers to Japan soar nearly 200% during the same period. Travel to Japan had been on a downward spiral following the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011, but analysts say recent demand has been driven by the weak yen. The Japanese government also amended the country's duty-free system last month to lure more tourists. Staying on the country's economic front, Korea's foreign exchange reserves dropped for the third straight month in October, marking the first time the figure has slumped for more than 3 months in a row since the global financial crisis in 2008. The Bank of Korea says that the country's foreign reserves amounted to $363.7 billion as of the end of October, down $680 million from the previous month. The central bank attributed the decline to the weakening euro and British pound against the greenback. And Korea is known for its chaebol, or conglomerates that dominate the domestic economy, but that leaves little room for new startups or small and mid-sized businesses to flourish. And that is shown in a new report which says more than half of newly established companies were spearheaded by conglomerates. Connie Kim reports.
The playing field for Korean businesses have gotten steeper over the past decade, with the big getting bigger and fewer companies getting their feet on the ground. Among Korea's largest 500 companies, management evaluation firm CEO Score says just 164 have been around for less than 20 years. Now that's a drop from nearly 200 from a decade ago. Look a little closer and the problem becomes even more apparent, as 63% of the newly established companies were spearheaded by conglomerates.
Looking at the recent businesses that have been newly established, most are related to the auto industry, IT, and electronics.
While conglomerates were branching out with their affiliates, only 12% of the 500 largest companies in Korea were startups. The IT sector made up a large portion of that figure, topped by the internet portal site Naver and gaming development company NCSoft. In the short term, CEO Score forecasts a tough road ahead for the establishment of new companies, citing the sluggish domestic economy, but said efforts to create a more startup-friendly environment were needed. While smaller companies are trying to make inroads, the Korean economy continues to be dominated by long-running giants such as Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motor, and Hyundai Heavy Industries. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Over in the United States, as vote counting is underway for the 2014 midterm elections, a dramatic political power shift appears to be taking place in Washington as the Republicans have retaken control of the Senate. The GOP has gained all 6 seats needed to claim a majority. Connie Lee has more.
The polls are now closed and Americans have spoken. Tens of millions turned out to cast their ballots in the midterm elections on Tuesday. And according to projections out of the U.S., the Republicans have retaken control of the Senate. One of the first victories of the night was Republican leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. Seen here casting his vote earlier in the day, McConnell is now set to be the Senate's majority leader now that he has been re-elected. The first gain for the Republicans came from Shelley Moore Capito, who won the Senate seat for West Virginia. Republicans needed to pick up 6 more seats to claim the Senate, and by Tuesday night, local time, they did. The Republicans now control both chambers of Congress. U.S. voters know the midterms will have a huge impact on the political future of the country.
It's a turning point as to which way the government goes and as to who controls the House and Senate. And it's important to me. I think it's important to everybody.
Analysts have been predicting a Republican victory as President Barack Obama's approval ratings have fallen to the lowest point of his administration. According to the latest Gallup poll, Obama's approval rate was only 42%, with 53% disapproving of his job as president. In early exit poll results, about half of all voters said the economy was the most important issue at this election, with most voters displeased with both parties for not being able to cooperate in Washington. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
And America's top diplomat has once again asked for China's help in getting North Korea to give up its nuclear program, saying support is not only wanted but necessary. Pyongyang, meanwhile, on the same day said it has no interest in discussing the matter with Washington. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says he hopes to work closely with China to make North Korea realize that its current path only leads to a dead end. In a speech at Johns Hopkins University on Tuesday, Kerry said North Korea will only realize security and prosperity when it gives up its nuclear program. The U.S. diplomat also stressed the importance of cooperation with China on non-proliferation. Last week, Kerry praised Beijing for putting pressure on the North by putting limitations on trade going into the country. China is North Korea's last remaining major ally and a key provider of food and fuel supplies. Kerry is scheduled to visit China this week for a range of multi-bilateral meetings, a week ahead of President Barack Obama's visit to Beijing for the APEC Leaders Summit. Kerry's comments come as North Korea ruled out holding talks with the United States regarding either its human rights or nuclear issues. A spokesperson from the North's Foreign Ministry said Tuesday Pyongyang would not discuss such topics with enemies that aim to topple the regime, adding it's only willing to speak with countries that respect its sovereign rights. Watchers say the official statement linking human rights and nuclear issues could be an attempt to influence Washington ahead of a possible UN General Assembly vote on a resolution against North Korea's human rights abuses. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
And the White House says President Barack Obama will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping when he visits Beijing next week for the APEC summit. At the center of the discussion will be how to shape the new model of relations between the two superpowers and, of course, how to deal with North Korea's nuclear threat. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
In their first major meeting since the Sunnyland summit in June last year, Presidents Barack Obama and Xi Jinping are expected to try and answer a tough question. What will the relationship of their nations look like in the future? The White House says Obama will hold bilateral talks with his Chinese counterpart next Wednesday in Beijing on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. President Xi wants a new model of great power relations in which Beijing will have a bigger say in the region. China has been taking strides by escalating maritime confrontations, launching new diplomatic initiatives like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and toughening its position on issues like cybersecurity. While Washington has resisted such ambitions, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry stressed the importance of getting the relationship right.
The U.S.-China relationship is the most consequential in the world today, period. And it will do much to determine the shape of the 21st century. That means that we have to get it right.
The two leaders will also discuss regional and global issues ranging from North Korea's nuclear program, the Ebola outbreak, pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, and China's territorial dispute with Japan in the South China Sea. President Obama's six-day, three-nation trip also takes him to Burma and Australia. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
And in a rare move for the reclusive state, North Korea has hosted its first fine art exhibition at its embassy in Britain. The Telegraph reports Pyongyang sent a group of 4 artists to London to capture scenes of the city over a period of 2 days. It said the men came from the country's elite Mansudae studio, an artists' collective tasked with creating portraits of leader Kim Jong-un and his family. The exhibition, initiated by a UK-based art historian, is open to the public from Tuesday through Friday this week. Over on Korea's political front, pension reform is the hot topic on the last day of a parliamentary questioning session at the National Assembly today. But if the opposition is going to go along with the ruling party's plans to overhaul the system, they want something in return. Ji Myung-gil has more.
The ruling Saenuri Party may be ready to make a deal to make sure its plans to overhaul the nation's pension scheme for public servants passes through. Pundits believe the ruling and opposition parties are working on a closed-door agreement that gives each side a concession to make it happen. The ruling party would gain support for its pension reform plans, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy would get a parliamentary investigation into the full Major Rivers Project, a green growth project launched under the previous Lee Myung-bak administration. Environmental activists have long been critical of the $20 billion project, claiming that it has seriously harmed water quality and river ecosystems. The opposition has said it would only consent to the pension reform bill after a social consensus is reached, but the party has said that modifying the pension system is needed for fiscal sustainability. The parliamentary bill would seek to rein in the pension system that would require some $46 billion in taxpayer money over the next 10 years. The governing Saenuri Party says all pending bills, including the pension reform bill, could be up for discussion, raising hopes that a bipartisan deal may be reached soon. Ji Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
And the low earnings report for Samsung Electronics in the third quarter has started a ripple effect that has local security firms downgrading their forecasts for other firms. They say the impact is likely to carry over well into next year. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
One by one, local securities firms are lowering their projections for Korean shares next year, citing a lack of growth momentum in the domestic economy. Kyobo Securities Company points to a faster-than-expected slump in exports as one of the main reasons, citing an earnings shock from Samsung Electronics in the third quarter of this year.
There is no growth engine to supplement the low earnings performance of Samsung Electronics. The country's automobile sector isn't likely to improve anytime soon, either due to low global demand, and this will spill over to Korean shares next year.
The analyst adds the shares may fluctuate within a wide margin as the Korean economy undergoes structural reforms. Projections for this year's main benchmark Kospi aren't all that bright either, as the gap between Korean shares and global shares are widening. The Kospi fell nearly 4% from the start of the year, the steepest drop among Asian countries. In contrast, the Dow Jones reached an all-time high, rising nearly 5% over the same period, while Japan's Nikkei inched up 3.5% on the back of Tokyo's expansionary monetary policies. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And more bad news for Samsung Electronics. The profitability gap between Samsung and Apple has widened. Korea's Hana Daetu Securities says Samsung Electronics recorded an operating profit margin of 7% in the third quarter, far below Apple's 27%, and a steep drop from the 20% mark Samsung recorded in the first 3 months of this year. The Korean tech giant has been lagging behind Apple in terms of profitability since 2011. Considering the popularity of Apple's latest smartphone models, experts predict the U.S. company will put even more distance between Samsung in the fourth quarter. And yesterday, we looked at an enormous Buddha scroll painting being shown at the National Museum of Korea. And today, we go back to the museum for a look at another limited time exhibition, this time including works from across Asia. Our Im Yoon-hee joins us in the studio. Welcome to the studio, Yoon-hee.
Thank you for having me. So that's right, the National Museum of Korea has been very busy lately, and after years of research, they have some information to share with us. So these artworks were collected by Japan during the colonization of of Korea. And more specifically, they were collected by the Joseon Government General Museum, which was established by Japan here in Korea in 1915. And almost 100 years later, we can now get a better idea of what they collected and why. So take a look.
East Asia is home to some of the world's most fascinating works of ancient art. And many of these masterpieces have been collected and studied over time at the National Museum of Korea. And now they're on display as part of a new limited exhibition that aims to shed light on the various artworks recovered during colonial Korea. In the span of just 35 years, the Government General Museum of Korea at the time collected rare Asian artifacts found across the Asian continent, from the ancient tombs of the Han Dynasty in China to the Korean peninsula and shores of Japan.
During those days, Kita-Kyushu was closely related to the Korean peninsula. Many moved from Kita-Kyushu to Korea, leading to similarities between the cultures.
The museum then changed its name to the Yi Royal Family Museum of Art and purchased many other ancient relics, like the pensive Bodhisattva, one of the most valuable sculptures of Chinese Buddhist art in Korea. And these works, along with around 200 other pieces, are now a source of better understanding the turbulent times of colonial Korea from an art collector's perspective.
So why did Japan collect these particular art pieces?
Right, so researchers have a few ideas, and one is that they use these artworks to sort of justify the colonization of Korea. Another is that they also wanted to prove Korea's cultural origin in China. But regardless, these works range from ancient days of Asia to modern time works as well. And so one thing is for sure, that every piece really does contribute to painting the picture for these researchers.
So how did Korea get hands on those art pieces? You just mentioned that it was Japan that collected those artworks.
Right, so the end of the colonization marked the establishment of the National Museum of Korea, and that was in 1945. And from then they took over the Yi Royal Family Museum and the artworks that belong there as well. And now some have said that this exhibition can be considered a bit politically colored, but researchers really want to emphasize that they need this work to get a better understanding of that time period as well. And so it's said that an art collection actually reveals the thoughts and philosophy of the curator and the one collecting those artworks as well. And so they're using this opportunity to get a better understanding of that time in Korea's history.
All right. I definitely should go to the National Museum of Korea to take a look at
Got a lot
this.
to offer.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Good afternoon. Our chilly morning has turned into a calm and nice afternoon with higher daytime highs today, reaching into the upper teens in many areas. And right now we are looking at clear blue skies with a few patches of clouds. But as we head into the day, later in the day, more clouds will be moving in. And it's been really dry lately, and a dry weather advisory remains in effect here in the capital, so be extra cautious when handling fire. With that, here are the readings for today. Now, the daytime high in the capital and Daegu will top out at 19, while Gwangju and Busan will climb up to 18 and 20, respectively. Now, for other regions, Jeju will be getting up to 18, and Daejeon and Dokdo will see highs of 17. Lots of clouds will be rolling in at the end of the week, with showers expected for the southern provinces, while Seoul will remain dry with highs in the mid-teens. That's all for me today. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, Jiyeon. And that does it for now. I'll be back at 4 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.